Hello everyone, it is I McLeod and today I'd like to discuss a little something called Skills are ruining Duel Links! Before I get started, a little bit of a thing about me. I started playing Duel Links with the Paradox Brothers even. That was all the way in mid-2017. Which means that I'm a very old player, probably older than most of you maybe. And you know what skills came out with the Paradox Brothers? Labyrinth Builder and 3-star Demotion, two of the most iconic and abused skills of Duel Links' history. And I don't mind those, I actually like them a lot. So don't peg me for one of these people that just hate skills for the sake of hating skills. There's a lot of them. But that's not me. However, I am still angry because I do like it when skills are fair and balanced and fun, and I think the skills that we have nowadays are none of those things. If we take a quick look at the history of Duel Links to really understand how we got there, from the beginning of Duel Links to, let's say, the middle of 2020, we got mostly generic skills, a couple of like archetypal ones, but it was mostly generic skills that defined the metagame. And then in the midst of 2020 up to the middle of 2022, we started getting stronger and stronger archetypal skills that pushed the decks that they supported to tiered status, basically. Starting in mid-2022, that's when things got too far and keep going too far, and somehow we keep pushing the envelope of how busted a skill can be. And to put things in perspective, people started complaining about skills as early as 2020. Anime skills, to be precise, a skill that supports a specific archetype as opposed to being a generic skill, and that's something that has only intensified over the years. If we take a look at early Duel Links skill, it's very simple. Most early Duel Links decks were beatdown oriented. You had very few archetypal decks, you had maybe Gravekeepers and RPs, and that was pretty much it, wasn't it? And so you had even fewer archetypal skills for these decks to use. It makes sense if you look at the cast of dual monsters like Yugi. What archetypes could you possibly give Yugi? Like, sure, you can argue that you can make a skill based on Dark Magician for Yugi, that makes sense, that's his ace monster, and maybe you could make a skill that if he summons it, he gets something. That makes a lot of sense. Now, if you take a guy like Odeon, what's Odeon supposed to play as a skill? What's Odeon even doing? Does this guy even have monster cards? I don't think he ever played a single monster in his entire life. So basically, you ended up with three kinds of skills in Duel Links. You had the generic skill that was supporting pretty much every archetype out there. You had a sort of typal skill that was not really supporting a specific archetype, but rather a specific type or attribute. And you have the rare archetypal skill that, still existed. There were a couple of them, but they weren't that great. And most importantly, all of these skills have very simple, very accessible effects. It's just one sentence. Keep that in mind for later. Things started changing with Yu-Gi-Oh! GX being released in late 2017. The very first GX Unlock character, Dr. Valiant Crawler, had a unique skill for Ancient Gears that really motivated you to play Ancient Gears because it's basically just an attack boost skill, right? Like Mythic Death was for water monsters, but also you could tribute the castle to summon an Ancient Gear Beast or maybe even an Ancient Gear Golem for basically free. Not only GX characters, but also DM characters released later down the line started getting some more archetypal-oriented skills, like a Trip of the Sleeve that was released with Arcana was obviously designed to work in conjunction with Dark Magician, something which had to be made clear because apparently a couple of players figured out that Cosmo Brain was a level 7 Dark Spellcaster and that you'd be better off just using it in Blue Eyes. And so a lot of the skills that were released around that time designed to support one archetype ended up being changed, like the very first version of Cybercell only said, hey, you just play Proto Cyber Dragons from outside of your deck, but then some decks started using the Proto Cyber Dragons not to fusion summon, but as tribute fodder for their vampires or UA monsters. So instead they nerfed the skill and made sure that you were only allowed to use those for fusion summoning. That didn't fix the issues with Cyberstyle, of course, but Mask Tribute is another skill that ended up being used in a way that Konami didn't foresee. You just get a free, normal vanilla monster. After you activate this skill, you can only summon Masked Beast Descardius, which is the thing that you're supposed to use the vanilla for. What could possibly go wrong? Well, if you're a Subterra player, you could just summon Nemesis Warrior, tribute the thing to your opponent's turn and get a big Subterra. Or if you're a Dinosaur player, just hit Survival's End, and bada bing! You have now access to a disruption. So Konami changed the skill once again. On top of these archetypal skills getting nerfed, a lot of generic skills ended up getting nerfed as well. Balanced Beatdown, you know the skills that a lot of people used at the very beginnings of Duel Links? They got worse. They were changed and they got worse, and then they got even worse, that's not a real word. So basically, throughout GX, 5Ds and Dark Side of Dimension worlds, a lot of generic skills got nerfed, a lot of archetypal skills got introduced, some of them got nerfed when they were used outside of their intended archetypes, and some of them got buffed to encourage playing said archetypes. For instance, Ultimate Dragons, which was introduced in the very beginning of the D-Sod world, was basically just this: you just put some more stuff in your extra deck, and then Konami was like, blam! Now you just get a free polymerization on turn 3 forward just by revealing Blue Eyes White Dragons stuck in your hand, so now you can just make Twin Burst super easily. All this to say, Konami was trying to encourage players to try archetypal skills and drop the more generic ones. Throughout the zexal era, which started in late 2020, a lot of generic skills got hit. That's how many of the old skills that they hit, which is a lot of them. Adding on to that, a lot of archetypal skills got released, and a lot of them ended up being meta-defining. Of course, we'll remember Onomatopoeia being one of the strongest skills of its era, but there was also Territory of the Sharks, which single-handedly enabled a deck that would not have existed otherwise. Galaxy Photon, which wasn't that big a deal. The Dragon's Knight Path, which somehow made Gaia playable. Demon's Resonance, which did the same thing for Resonators. And some archetypes even ended up getting several skills that each provided something unique to the archetype. Like TG's got Flight Control, which was basically another version of Switcheroo, and Set Delta Axle, which pushed the envelope of what a synchro deck could do. And that is when the complaints started. A lot of people, especially on the subreddit, have been really upset that anime skills just too much, and how are all the decks supposed to compete with all of these broken skills that make these decks so much more consistent? It all boils down to something very simple. At the end of the day, you are either playing a deck that was prominently featured in one of the many Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime series, recently got support and also got a dedicated skill, or you were not. And if you were not, chances were you were falling behind in terms of playability. But when we take a closer look at some of these skills, they all look really similar and very simple still, right? Oh wow, that's a lot of text. For a skill, that's not the one-sentence thing that I was used to, but it's still a very simple effect once you pass through it. All this says basically is you put one card from your hand back into your deck to get the Gaia field spell face up on your field, and then you can only summon these monsters for the rest of the turn. That makes sense. If we take a look at Demon's Resonance, that's also a lot of text, but all this says is basically you reveal a Resonator, return one card from your hand to your deck, and then you get any level 4 fiend type monster that you want. Then you have some restrictions that you need to take into account and some deck building conditions. But it's all still a very simple singular effect. Of course, some of you might know that Demon's Resonance had to be changed later on and given a bit more conditions in order to avoid people having too much fun with it. Like for instance, playing Obelisk the Tormentor in a deck that very easily put 3 monsters onto the field in the very first turn, at a time where Obelisk was somehow a really difficult card to deal with, which is probably the most playable an Egyptian god has ever been up until that point. More infamously, Onomatopoeia was also very simple at first. You take 2 Onomat monsters, you return them to the deck, and then you had 2 Onomat monsters. Sounds easy enough, right? Konami's first intent at balancing the skill, I'm still not sure if it was a buff or a nerf, but they reduced the number of things you can switch through from 2 to 1, which didn't really impede the deck all that much. So instead they had to slap a couple of restrictions onto the skill, which made it completely unplayable, and honestly, the community was relieved at that point to see Onomats go down the drain. Looking back at all 3 of these skills that each ended up being meta-defining for a time, we can see that they all started getting more complex in their restrictions as a means to balance them out, but still had a very simple, very straightforward effect. It was basically a switcheroo. The early Arc 5 era started out really close to the early Zexal era, by which I mean the best deck of the first months of Arc 5 being live was basically the best deck of the previous format Harpies, which was still using Harpies Hunting Ground, the skill that I showed at the very beginning of the video, except it got a couple of changes to make it more balanced, but it was still the best deck around. Followed closely by newcomer Melodious, which also had a mechanically unique skill that benefited this archetype and this archetype only, locked you into this archetype and this archetype only, but did something more than simply switcheroo. In fact, there's no switcheroo effect at all, it's just you transform a small monster into a big one. But then, in October 2021, Clock of Destiny released, a skill that has more text that most Yu-Gi-Oh players have read in their entire life. Let's take a look at this skill's effect. Yes, plural, because for the very first time, this skill had two effects they could use. The first of which searched your clock tower prison in exchange for discarding a Destiny Hero monster, and the second effect, once you had set the clock tower prison that you had just searched, allowed you to put 3 counters on it, basically ensuring that the 4th one would be put during your opponent's standby phase and you would be protected against battle damage, and gave you a free Mystical Space Typhoon for you to pop the clock tower prison with. Duel Links connoisseurs know that this was done all in favor of encouraging the Dreadmaster playset of Destiny Hero, which was not a real thing until this skill happened. It's also worth noting that this skill does have a restriction on the stuff that you're allowed to play in your main deck, but not in the extra deck, which means that you can just go to town with some of the best hero cards of the time. Brave Neos, Masked Hero Hanky, Elemental Hero Sunrise later down the line, and so on and so forth. Following this, we also got a Gandora skill. Gandora is not even a real archetype, did you know that? That's just 3 cards, well, 4 cards now. This skill also had several effects, let's take a look at them together. So the first effect is basically Switcheroo for Gandora, and it also gives you an additional Gandora summon. The second effect nobody has ever used in their entire life. But the third effect is a passive one that applies if you had activated any of the previous effects. You just get to put a Gandora monster from outside of your deck to your graveyard. So in short, this skill is basically a switcheroo and something else that sets you up for future plays. Not soon after, we got the release of U2 and Phantom Knights with the skill Phantom Strategy, which, you know what, I'm just gonna let you read the skill, and you're gonna come to the same conclusion than before. This is basically a switcheroo and something else that sets you up, isn't it? Except you don't even return a card from your hand to your deck, you just put it in a graveyard where it's set up because it's a Phantom Knight. So it's basically a skill that sets you up and then sets you up further. And then we got DDDs, which also had a skill that sets you up for having a Doom King Armageddon in your hand. You just get a skill for free and then sets you up even further by putting the Doom King Armageddon in your extra deck where you can bring it back. And then Xyz Galaxy did pretty much the same thing, where you just set yourself up and you get an effect, and then you set yourself up further. And then Mechlord Refinements, you pitch a card to get a card, and that sets up your Mechlord Astro Triskelion. And then Spell of Roses, where you set a card to your grave that you can revive with Basil Rose Shoot, and then you get another card for your future plays. And then Favorite Duel is basically the same thing. You set up your Elemental Hero stuff, and then you get a Miracle Fusion that you can use later on with the stuff that you just pitched. Speaking of Favorite Duel, it was the de facto Elemental Hero skill for a very long time because it just gave you so much of an advantage, until Hero Alliance released, which gave you even more of an advantage. Most notably, if you summon Neos, you get to search Super Poly, or from outside of your deck, Poly, Miracle Contact, or Miracle Fusion, all 3 of which are, I don't know if you've heard about it, but pretty playable in here. This was also the very first skill in the game to have the condition that you can just normal summon a big vanilla beta without tributing. Speaking of which, the variant era started with Magician's Magic, which not only had the very exact same condition as Hero Alliance did for Neos but with Dark Magician, but also was the first objective +1 skill, because if you return a Dark Magician Girl, or Magical Dimension, or Magic Cylinder from deck to your hand, you get to add 2 cards from your deck to your hand instead. And then if you summon Dark Magician, you get a free card also. Blue Eyes will also later get the same treatment with Blue Eyes Dimension, which was basically pretty much the same thing. You get to summon Blue Eyes for 3, and later down the line you got Battle Chronicle, which did the same thing but also included Dragon Spirit of White, lets you search Successor Soul, and was overall very annoying to deal with. But no skill really exemplified how far skill design went and how much I hated it than my least favorite skill of all time, a bond that illuminates the future. Let's take a look at this skill in its entirety together, shall we? So first and foremost, the very first effect sets you up and then sets you up further. You get to send a Synchron or level 2 Wind Water monster from your hand to the graveyard to get any Synchron monster that you want, like say Junk Synchron, which if you normal summon, you can immediately use. But on top of that, it also gives you Synchro Chase, so that if you tune the Junk Synchron with the thing that you sent to make Junk Warrior, you get to revive the junk synchron as well, so that's like a 1-card Stardust. But that's not all. The second part of the effect might be a bit confusing at first, because it's like, why would I empty my field in order to set 2 random Signer Dragons? Well, because 2 monsters better than 1, and also this part was so poorly designed that it accidentally synergized with a bunch of meta-relevant cards at the time. Mech Knights were already making their niche in the metagame, but Mind Control was a selection box exclusive, which you were just allowed to use. You could just mind control your opponent's monster, send it to the graveyard with the skill, and then if it had 2500 attack or more, you just get 2 free dragons just for stealing your opponent's monster. What fun! And just in case you were worried about these dragons not being playable, you can just flip summon them this turn. That's just a thing that you're allowed to do, which is weird that they've included this. I guess this is so you can still Book of Moon one of them before they commit to further plays, because you can't respond to skills in Duel Links. But okay. But that's not all! Because after all of this bullshit, you can still super easily make Quasar just by clicking the yellow button to get a livestream dragon to then use with the 2 Signer Dragons that you got for free earlier. Wow, isn't that super fun and interesting? And last but not least, this skill basically has no restrictions whatsoever. You only have to play a minimal amount of monsters to be able to play it. Sure, you can play Link or Xyz monsters, but you're gonna make Quasar, so who cares? And also you can still play huge beat stick that can just win you the game and get you advantage, like the Mech Knights that I mentioned earlier. Following this disaster of the skill, we got Raging Pendulum, the skill that single-handedly defined the entirety of 2023 in Duel Links. So first and foremost, this skill just gives you scales for free, which, you know what? Pendulum decks are bothersome enough as is. If you're gonna play a Pendulum deck, you should get the scales for free. That makes sense. And then you take a look at the scale and you realize, wait, all you have to do is be playing Odd Eyes Raging and Dark Rebellion in your extra deck, perform a Pal or Magician or Odd Eye scales, but you can play pretty much anything. Which, spoiler alert, people did. Turns out Raging Pendulum was one of the best, if not the best Orcust variant out there. And once we get to the actual effect, it's kind of absurd, because for simply stacking up your scales, you get 2 cards put in your extra deck, one of which we can retrieve with the Overdragon Magician that you just said, by the way, because this card had been released recently. And you also get a free level 4 from Thin Air, which... why was this even part of the effect at all? Well, it's also you can make Dark Rebellion Seas Dragon super easily, which then leads you to making Odd Eyes Raging Dragon super easily as well. And somehow things would only get worse from this point forward. Hero Alliance was too balanced, so instead here's Eternal Bond, a skill that also allows you to just summon Neos and Jubel without tributing, and also has no limits on how many times you can use it per duel, because why are restrictions even applicable? And once we get to the actual effects, you either get to immediately evolve your Jubel monster, which you can do several times per turn, by the way. You can just summon Jubel, activate the skill to turn into Terra Incarnate, flip it, activate the skill to turn into Ultimate Nightmare, flip it, and activate the skill again to get a +1 on top of everything, whether you search Neos or Superpolar or Miracle Contact. And if you search Miracle Contact and happen to open Neos, you get to make Neos Clodges super easily. Hooray! I'm not gonna cover every single stupid skill that was released in that era, but let's just say there's too many of them. The Soul of Light and Darkness. Just start the duel with 8 cards in your graveyard that sets you up so that you can ritual summon without ritual summoning it, and you can just recycle your cards so you can keep doing it eternally. Tycoon Dragon Domination released in early 2024 and was so miserable to play against that it single-handedly became the single best deck in the format. That's right, we had a tier 0 Tachyon Dragon format. Because that's what happened when you just print a skill that says click yellow button, search Omni Negate. And by the way, I had to personally reword the skill because the original inclusion of this skill was written by a cryptic shitbox. And after that we had Shiranui Style's successor, which basically said if you set yourself up by playing Shiranui, you also get to search Shiranui's Time Samsara, which is a card that says what if you never took battle damage ever again. And then after that we had Tuning in the Sky, which this is the post-nerf version. A lot of these skills had to be nerfed for obvious reasons, but the pre-nerf versions basically allow you to make any amount of synchro plays and end up with Sky Scourge Invincible face up on your field, which is basically a spell negate. Did I say spell negate? I mean every spell negate. And after that I'm skipping a couple of skills because there's just too many. Sacred Beast Beckoning. Your opponent controls a monster, use the hand trap, click yellow button, you get a 4000 beta just for free. Shark Magic Combo, remember when Territory of the Sharks had actual restrictions and rewarded you for setting up? Well, this one sets you up and rewards you for setting up and rewards you for going second. Borrowed Link, if you have cards in hand, you just set up your plays forever, and if your opponent did anything, you get a free link to also. All culminating in Starving Venom Invasion, the latest and most obscene skill to be released in Duel Links. Isn't it kind of insane that we moved from balance, which had to be, well, balanced several times because it was just too broken to have a skill that enabled your deck to be hyper consistent, to a skill that says, you just search any cards that you need. You just have all the counterplay that you need because you can just place a Predator counter on pretty much anything and not have to worry about anything. Would I shock you if I told you that a deck that has a skill that allows you to use Predator Plant, Drosophilium Hydra without any restrictions whatsoever turned out to actually be the best deck of this format? So how do we fix this? I don't know. Well, actually, I do have a couple of ideas. First and foremost, you just need to stop putting effects onto the skills. Skills should be one effect, maybe two at most, and that's it. Borrowed Link is a very wordy skill as is, and it does a lot of things just for existing. You get to send two things to your graveyard, which you can use as graveyard fodder later on for Chaos Dragon Leveneer, or any amount of rocket plays that you want to make. But also, it has this third effect where you just get a free link to. Why do you get a free link to? What if we just remove that part of the skill? That'd be a decent first step in balancing it. And to Konami's credit, I think they acknowledged that this was an issue because some of the leak scales that might be releasing in the near future do not have this insane amount of board building and advantage generation that all of these other scales have. And it's just simple. You reveal a thing, you get a thing. After returning a thing, and we're back to switcheroo levels of skills. And also, in case of Hieratic, you get a second effect, but I'm fine with it, because there's an actual cost. You see, you have to send a card from your hand or field to your grave to get a spell trap, which is another form of switcheroo, I guess. That's fine. Which leads to my next point. You gotta put some cost on these skills. If you take a look at the Sacred Beast skill that I briefly showed earlier, it's insane that there is just a part of the skill that says, your opponent did anything, you just get a big beta. You just get a big beta. You click the yellow button, you summon Raviel, you have Fallen Paradise, your opponent can't do anything about it. Isn't that fun? Which is weird to me, because the skill previously also has a cost, an actual cost for the first part that's basically switcheroo. Why did we add a cost in the first part of the skill and then forgot about all costs in the second part? And once again, to Konami's credit, the new skills that got leaked actually have costs associated to them. Like I said, we're back to switcheroo, which is great. And last but not least, something that has been more of a problem as more extra deck summoning methods have been released is you gotta put some restrictions on what cards you're allowed to play in the main and in the extra deck. You really thought you would make it out of this video without me complaining about Revolution de Fleur? Revolution de Fleur is insane, and the only restriction on the skill is this little tidbit over there. You just need to be playing 6 spellcasters with 2900 attack, and that's pretty much it, which is Sauge de Fleur, Sorcière de Fleur, 3 copies of each, and you're set to make all of the synchro plays that you desire. It is so insane, in fact, that there are so many decks that just use Revolution de Fleur as an engine to get their stuff started. And most of them just end up doing Dengetsu or the very same synchro play as every other deck. So while a lot of people are really appreciative of Revolution de Fleur for being a generic skill with a lot of applicability, I'd argue that this is not generic at all. That's just a skill that you staple into whatever that you want, and you diminish a deck's identity just by playing it, which is silly. Another example, maybe. I'd be more favorable to Predator Plants doing whatever the fuck they want and opening all the cards that they need and placing a free Predator Plant counter on my stuff, if they also didn't have access to Xyz and Link plays, including being able to make Assemble Nightingale, a card which basically says, if you go first, you can't lose the duel on your next turn. That's just not gonna happen, don't worry about it. It's basically great but better, and great got nerfed. And once again, to Konami's credit, the new skills that got leaked actually have restrictions and make sure that you don't stray too far from the archetype they're designed to be played in. And I'm glad that Konami has learned their lessons, because after a format in which a skill allowed a deck to basically set up any amount of synchro plays and end up on Spell Canceller, followed by a format in which Ghost Tricks of all deck were just allowed to pretty much activate Summon Breaker anytime they wanted in your opponent's turn, I think it was time to acknowledge that skills have been way too powerful as of late. Yes, you heard me right. Ghost Tricks got a skill that is so insane that they became one of the defining metagame threats of the current format. Take that, white boy! I'm not a complicated man. All I want for skills to be doing is to help fix one of a certain deck's weaknesses, not all of them, just one. And this weakness is often consistency, I'm fine with that. 2. Encourage building decks around several skill options instead of limiting you to the one thing that the skill is allowing you to do. And 3. Have a clearly defined ceiling. If you're gonna play a fusion-based archetypes, maybe your skill should allow you to play Xyz or Link or Synchro monsters. On the other hand, skills should not, in my opinion, completely eliminate any issues a deck has with consistency by making it near perfectly consistent, as was the case with many recent skills. Shove a singular line of play down your throat like the Quasar skill that really wanted you to make Quasar, or the Odd Eyes Raging skill that really wanted you to make Odd Eyes Raging Dragon, which led to any amount of rules breaking and mind bending just to get there without acknowledging that this could be problematic if you were to do literally anything else. And 3, lack any meaningful counterplay, which is starting to be the case with more and more skills that get this stupid clause where it says, hey, if you control a thing, you just shuffle it on your field back into the deck to get another thing on your field for basically free, which allows you to play around Book of Moon. Oh wow, how convenient. I can't help but feel a bit sad when I look at Starving Venom Invasion, because I can't help but compare it to the other Predator Plant skill that also seemed very interesting before release, Predator Dimension, a skill that looks much more tame in comparison, and doesn't generate nearly as much advantage, which is why nobody has ever even looked at it twice. That's not to say that the game is automatically better without broken skills. We all remember the fun times that we had in 6-Sam Tier 0 format, but the game is definitely made worse when obscene skills define the metagame. I'm gonna go on one last tangent, because I really like this little bit that was mentioned in one of the Top Players Council tier list that Duel Links Meta does every week. Jade Hex mentioned that so many decks out there have a Mathmex circular level skill to generate 3 advantage, and I think this is really representative of Duel Links in 2024. What's a bit ironic is that this article was written in the wake of Star Seraphs getting a new bonker skill, which actually, let's take a look at the Star Seraph skill. Baryon Battle Morph, the Baryon's White Shield, allows you to, once per turn, any amount of times per duel, set a Staff Seraph monster from your deck and one from your hand in face down defense position, which means you have 2 monsters on your board before you even commit to your normal summon. And if your opponent controls anything, send a monster from field to your graveyard to get a free rank up card from outside of your deck, on top of playing another Star Seraph monster from your deck, which is the thing that I was alluding to earlier when I said, oh, you Book of Moon my thing? I click yellow button and suddenly I have another monster that is face up, because all of these are set, but you can flip summon them the turn that they are set, because of course you can. And to be fair, what I'm showing here is the post-nerf version of the skill. Can you try to guess what they changed about this skill? Well, before the skill got nerfed, the third pack was not even once per duel. That's the one thing that they changed. It was a simple once per turn, just like the second part, but you could use it any number of times per duel. And if Star Seraphs are getting a skill so busted that everyone can immediately recognize it for the broken, poorly designed shit that it is, how come we keep getting those skills? Well, if the previously leaked skill that I showed earlier are any indication, we should stop getting those, and hopefully we will never get such broken skills ever again, because I just can't take it anymore. But hey, there's always a risk, right? That suddenly we get Atticus or something as a skill that makes Red Eyes tier 0. Oh boy, now that I've said it, it's definitely gonna happen, isn't it? Thank you for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this video. This was a long time coming, and I've been working on this for a very long time, and the more I pushed working on this, the more Konami released completely bonkers skills, to the point where I can't just sit there and ignore them anymore. Thank you in particular to my donators on Coffee, Dingus, Zinnia, Boy0, Jimmy, and Yannick. Thank you once again for your support. If you'd like to donate and support my endeavors, there's a link to my Coffee in the video description. Also, I'd really appreciate if you like, commented, and subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. Let me know if there's a skill that you particularly dislike, or a skill that you wish existed, or simply comment something nice that you saw, like something cool that has happened to you recently. I'd appreciate that. Alright, that's it. That's the end of the video. Thank you once again for watching. Take care, everyone. I'll see you all next time.